You're listening to the Doctors In podcast from martinclinic.com. Although we share a lot of practical and, in our opinion, awesome information, what you hear on this podcast is not intended to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent any disease. It's strictly for informational purposes. So enjoy. Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctors In podcast, and this is episode 172. And today it's going to be part one of a two-part series that we're titling the 3 biggest causes of fatigue in women. One of the things that probably the biggest, I would say the biggest symptom that people get a hold of us for is fatigue. And it's a frustrating thing. You know, many of you that have been with us for a while know our history and know how we kind of went off in the direction that we are in now. And of course, it has to do with my mother, your wife, and her initial symptoms were just a tremendous amount of fatigue. Yeah. And we have it's funny, we have a good old video on our website on a documentary that was done, and my mother was in the documentary, and it's been done, I think was it the 80s?
Yeah, late 80s.
So, I mean, it looks like an 80s video, right, with the hairstyles, and I get a kick out of watching it. I remember the 80s. It's interesting, but that fatigue, we get so many emails and so many questions about fatigue. And what we wanted to do in this next couple of episodes is try to, we're big fans of what we call the 80-20 rule. We want to give the 3 biggest causes of fatigue, and they pretty much would cover at least 80% of the people that get a hold of us for fatigue.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're listening and you're exhausted, one of the questions we like to ask people is like, when was the last time you felt fantastic?
Yeah.
Right? Like, when's the last time? And you always...
I scale it up because I always ask them, okay, I'm 10 out of 10. And most days I really am, right? And I'm very thankful about that. But I say, okay, compared to that, 10 being me, and, they know me in the office and I'm jumping around and I get pretty excited pretty quickly. Okay, you're 10 out of 10. And what are you? And then I get the number, right? 2s and 3s and -0 and -10 and barely functioning, and I get a lot of that. So it's the first question that I ask. It's always that because I want to know what their energy levels are. And the vast majority of people that come in, they might have other issues, but that's
it's a
certainly
symptom
part
for
of it.
so many issues. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to cover. So we could have titled this just as easily the 3 main causes of exhaustion in women, 3 main causes of fatigue, 3 main causes of chronic low energy. I mean, everybody goes through a period of time where they may feel a little low energy. The body might be fighting something off. But I'm talking about somebody who is tired every day. They go to bed tired. They either sleep or they don't sleep. Most of the time, they're not sleeping. Mm-hmm. And if they're tired in the morning, if they do get a good night's sleep, they're still tired. They're just exhausted. And think of the effect that, and we hear this, it has on their life, their family life, economic life, their marriage, their relationships. I mean, when somebody is exhausted, it is almost impossible for them to maintain a normal day-to-day routine.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because, and here's the thing, if you and I are out playing a sport and you twist your ankle, you can wrap it up, get on some crutches for a bit, and if you were hobbling along, somebody would come up and say, hey, what happened to your ankle? Because you visibly are limping around. When it comes to things like exhaustion, most people look at you and they can't appreciate what's really going on. Now, you may look tired. I remember if talking to Mom about, when she was going through a real exhaustion back in a long time ago, and people they didn't know how to handle it a lot of times. And every once in a while, somebody would come up and say, oh, you look so exhausted or you look so tired, which is not a compliment. It's not a compliment, right? But aside from...
like you say, it's not visible. And just point to what you're saying, because I see a lot of people and they say, well, yeah, but I'm still doing a lot of things. The point is that I said, well, yeah, but you're running on fumes and you're doing things on your personality. Because if a man, again, I don't want to be, it's not 100%, but a lot of men, when they're exhausted, I mean, they wouldn't get out of bed for the same amount of exhaustion that women have. Women are usually driven. They know they got to do this, this, and this, and this, and they got to get it done. So in spite of the fact that they don't feel well, they still do things.
Yeah, they manage to hold things together,
Yep.
but it's definitely straining them. And a lot of times it can strain all the relationships around them because the energy's just not there. So, again, that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the three main causes of exhaustion or fatigue in women. So, and these three areas, as we mentioned, is going to cover 80% of the people that are listening. And let me just say this. It's impossible to have full energy if you have a problem in any of these areas. We'll say that right off the top.
Yeah.
And as an aside, it's also, I don't want to say impossible, but it's very difficult to lose weight if you have a problem in any of these areas because these spill over to metabolism as well. And it's also very hard to have a sharp brain if you have a problem in these three areas. So these three areas will cover a lot of different areas. So if you're listening and you're frustrated because you haven't been able to find answers, a lot of people go to their doctor for low energy. They get a lot of blood work done. And things generally come back normal, generally speaking. And a lot of times people with exhaustion, and the frustrating thing is a lot of times they're told it's in their head or they're depressed. And here's the thing. We always tell the story of the Titanic when we talk about energy.
Yeah.
The Titanic, pretty much the whole world has seen the movie. It's still one of the highest. I think it's second overall still in history of revenue. So, it's everybody has seen the Titanic pretty much. And
it's a fascinating story.
And we're all familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
And, we all know the end result. But most people are unaware that the Titanic had actually received a whole bunch of warnings throughout the day from other ships that were already in the direction they were going. They were already in the ice. So the Titanic knew that there were problems ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
And we all know what happened. In fact, I think it was the USS California, right? USS California. Mm-hmm. They were 10 minutes or so ahead, and they sent a warning saying it's terrible. And one of the last communications from the Titanic was from the wireless operator, and he tapped back and basically saying, shut up, we're tired. They were tired of hearing the warnings, and then, of course, the rest is history. The point of the story is even the Titanic had warnings. It wasn't like they didn't know what they were going into. And the body does the same thing. A lot of times, one of the first warning signs that our body gives us is lack of energy. And we tell people that lack of energy is like a check engine light, right? A check engine light can mean a lot of things. Energy can mean a lot of things. Almost anything can cause low energy, but that's a check engine light that just went on. And you're not going to take electrical tape and just cover up your dash and just ignore the check engine light. And even in a car, a check engine light could be nothing. It could be that you didn't tighten your gas cap. I found that out, right? Then wait, it says click it, and that can do it. Or it could be something serious, like your engine's going to fall apart unless you get it checked out. And energy could be the same thing. But here's the frustrating thing when it comes to energy. It's hard to figure out why you have low energy. Traditional blood testing, unless you have anemia or something that just jumps out on the report, it is very difficult to figure out why you have low energy. So that's why it's frustrating. So a lot of people are frustrated. But let me just say this. Fatigue is a warning sign. Fatigue is a check engine light. There's a cause. Fatigue doesn't just happen for no reason. All right, so that's a long introduction. Let's talk about the 3 energy killers in women. So today we'll talk about as many of them as we can, and then we'll carry over next week into the next episode. But we'll list them right off the top. So the 3 biggest energy killers in women, the first one is the Bermuda Triangle of hormones, which we talk about a lot, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that. That's the first one. So the Bermuda Triangle of hormones, we're talking about cortisol, we're talking about thyroid hormones, and we're talking about estrogen. But we'll come back to that. The second cause, or the second energy killer in women, is high circulating insulin. That's That's a big cause of low energy in women. And the third thing is very specific deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies that is common in women that can lead to fatigue. So we'll talk about those deficiencies on the next episode as well. All right, so those are the three big headings. So it's the Bermuda Triangle of hormones, high circulating insulin, and deficiencies. So let's talk about the Bermuda Triangle of hormones. We've had a lot of names for this over the years. We used to call it the unholy trinity of hormones. We kind of like the concept of the Bermuda Triangle because it's just a mess.
Yeah, it's a mess and it's complicated, right? You know, you get in there. And in mainstream medicine they've missed the boat here because they always, like you said, they look for disease. And so most tests are looking for disease and not for imbalances. And if your hormones are not balanced, ladies, it's complicated in the sense that you need balance. You know, I loved your illustration. If we just talked about the thyroid for a second, I think we talked about this maybe a month ago or whatever, that in a whole year, your complete amount of thyroid hormone that is secreted is what? Is it a tablespoon or
I think
less?
it's a teaspoon.
It's a teaspoon.
And which is amazing to think about.
Yeah, imagine the organ that sort of orchestrates that, you know.
Yeah, the master gland in a sense, right?
The master gland, thyroid, operates on like a teaspoon of.
That's how powerful the thyroid hormone is.
Yeah.
And imagine trying to test it properly when even the slightest decrease in the amount that you produce can cause major effects in the body. And some people are more sensitive. Even the smaller decrease in thyroid hormone has a big effect on them. So when they get tested, it's very difficult to test the thyroid.
Yeah.
And also, and this is something else a lot of people don't understand when it comes to testing. So imagine you have 100 people that get a test done. So 100 people go in, they get a test done. This is how they come up with values. So they have the 95 percentile. So 95% of the people fit in a range, and that range is normal. 2.5% are below that. 2.5% is above that. And here's the thing about that. If you go somewhere and you look at 100 people, there's not 100 healthy people out there out of 100. And definitely not 95 of them are healthy.
Exactly.
So what ends up happening is that as the population gets sicker, the blood test, it shifts. It's like the bell curve, right? So 95% fit into the healthy range.
Well, look at what we see in the thyroid today compared to what it used to be. And I mean, I can tell you exactly why, but the thing is, the laboratories have not adjusted to that at all. And this is why when they come out with the TSH in the early 70s, I mean, it was the test of all tests for the thyroid. The problem is like you say, you can't compare the 1970s to the year 2019. Completely different. We live in a different world environmentally and nutritionally. You name it, it's completely different. And that's why I always tell my patients, look, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, you got all the thyroid symptoms, it's your thyroid. The lab is not, you can't rely on the lab. You have to rely on your
thyroid
symptoms.
The thyroid, really, you have to pay attention to the symptoms. Why don't you talk a little bit about the idea of the Bermuda Triangle hormones? Because women that are exhausted rarely just have a problem with their thyroid, or they rarely just have a problem with cortisol or their adrenals, or rarely have a problem with their ovaries or estrogen, progesterone. It's typically the Bermuda Triangle. All three are involved, and we've talked about this a lot. In fact, if you go to our website, you can sign up for free and watch a course, a full video course that we did on the metabolic storm. We call it How to Repair the Bermuda Triangle of Hormones, and a lot of people have gone through that program. They feel better, and you can go right to our website and sign up for it. But why don't you talk a little bit about the idea of why these three hormones are connected?
Yeah, and women, their hormones are very, very much connected to one another. So one of the biggest things, that just to use as an example, that we see in the office is what we call estrogen dominance. Too much estrogen, and that, of course, is in relationship to progesterone. Okay, just for bad periods, weight gain, they don't feel good, mood swings, maybe acne and endometriosis, polycystic ovarian, you name it. Bad periods, and some patients come in and they've been like that from the day they ovulated for the very first time. And then they wonder, well, what's that got to do with my thyroid? Well, it has everything to do with the thyroid, because when estrogen is dominant, the thyroid is slowed down. The thyroid won't work at the top of its game. It's very much connected to the ovaries. Of course, men, we don't have that connection. And so the thyroid, and this is where you can have hair loss, and you can have, exhausted, which we're talking about today. But when estrogen is dominant, the thyroid is affected. And then you add in your adrenals, your cortisol, your stress hormone. That's adding fuel to the fire, right? It's making things even more complicated.
Which is why women have symptoms. A lot of times they have a hard time figuring out what's going on because they have symptoms of all three. Mm-hmm. So let's talk quickly. Let's just go through the different parts of the Bermuda Triangle, just see if we can add a little bit of clarity to that for people. So the thing that we tell people about the thyroid is you have to remember, like, the thyroid is the master gland. It's tiny. It doesn't weigh much, but yet it can control every system and almost every cell in your body. It can affect hair, like as you mentioned. It can affect everything. When your thyroid is slow, everything slows down, right? Yeah. Everything slows down. But the thing about the thyroid is that the thyroid is a puppet. It only does what your brain tells it to do, specifically your pituitary and your hypothalamus, right? So you have your hypothalamus that tells your pituitary that then goes and tells your thyroid to get to work. So you can have a problem in the thyroid, or you can have a problem in the pituitary, or you can have the problem in the hypothalamus, right? Mm-hmm. And that any one of those things can affect. So you can think of this, how complicated this is for a second. The hypothalamus uses a hormone to tell the pituitary, which uses a hormone to stimulate the thyroid, which is thyroid-stimulating hormone. TSH, secreted by your pituitary gland, tells your thyroid to get to work. Then your thyroid turns around and then makes T4, T3, T2, T1, and then some calcitonin. But the active form of the hormone is T3. Yet 90% of the hormone that is made by your thyroid gland is T4. So then T4 has to be converted into T3. So think of all the things that can go wrong in a thyroid. It's amazing. Even we talked about before, something like insulin resistance can affect the thyroid, right? So we'll talk about that in a second, but that's the thyroid. And so the thyroid's a puppet. And here's something else about the thyroid that we like to tell people. Subclinical hypothyroidism, so you can have a sluggish thyroid, can exist for 7 years before any change in blood numbers. So you can have every symptom of thyroid, and it won't even put a dent in your lab values. Yeah. So you got to wait 7 years sometimes to see an effect in your blood. Yeah. So, it's a very frustrating experience, and it kills their energy, which is why we list it as an energy killer for women. It's a very big, common one. They gain weight all over. They have hair problems, they thinning eyebrows, body temperature issues, dry skin. There's so many, like, you can imagine even a typical presentation of what you see for somebody with thyroid all the time.
Well, yeah, exactly. They come in and hey, doc, I just look at food and I'm gaining weight. Why is that, right? Hey, my hair. I look at your hair, it looks pretty good to me, And the woman, no, but look at the patches, or it's falling out, it's very dry. Look at my nail. For a woman, these things that men, we lose hair, who cares, right? But for a woman, that is an important thing. But nobody can tell them why that's happening.
Well, especially when their blood values are normal. So let's quickly talk about cortisol, which is another part of this Bermuda Triangle hormones. Well, the same thing. The hypothalamus tells your pituitary gland to get your adrenals going, and then adrenals will secrete cortisol. And here's the thing. Cortisol is a cyclical circadian hormone, meaning it has a time of day when it's supposed to be higher, and it has a time of day when it's supposed to be lower. Now, since cortisol will raise your blood sugar levels, will get you in that fight or flight, you want that in the morning, but you don't want that at the end of the day when you're trying to sleep. Yeah. But somebody that has adrenal exhaustion, or they have an issue with their adrenal glands, or they got elevated cortisol, it's high all the time. And when it's high all the time, good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, and you and I always talk about cortisol being an accelerant, meaning you add cortisol to anything, it makes it worse. Yeah. Cortisol to high blood pressure makes it worse. Cortisol to your gut makes it worse. Cortisol to your brain makes it worse. So, I mean, this
can't focus. You can't. Yeah.
So it's a major,
and you can't turn your brain off when you want to go to sleep at night.
That's right. And that's
all of a sudden, I've had people said I used to be a good sleeper, and now I might sleep for the first hour, then I'm up. And I said, well, that's cortisol. That's what it'll do. It'll wake your brain up, and you think it's 7 o'clock in the morning when it's 1:30 a.m.
And the brain's operating, the brain's running. And cortisol will create a ton of inflammation. But here's the thing. It kills your energy, just like a sluggish thyroid kills your energy. So cortisol will kill your energy, but then it also has a whole bunch of peripheral symptoms: cravings, salt and sugar, the need to snack, anxiety. Anxiety is such a major symptom of elevated cortisol, weight gain. All these things, again, you mash the symptoms of cortisol and thyroid, and they can overlap a little bit. But, somebody will say, I got thyroid symptoms, I got adrenal symptoms, what's going on? It's like, well, you got the Bermuda Triangle hormones going on. They're all involved, which brings us to the last one we want to talk about, which is estrogen. We talk about estrogen dominance a lot. And we always get somebody in menopause, they're like, well, I'm in menopause, so my estrogen's low. It is low. However, estrogen dominance doesn't have to do with the amount of estrogen. It has to do with the ratio between estrogen and progesterone.
Yeah. And that is so key to understand that, because that's
so they can be in menopause and still be estrogen dominant. Yeah. And they can't, it's hard. I understand it's hard for people to understand that. But it has nothing to, yes, your estrogen levels have declined.
It's normal.
But your progesterone has declined as well, and you have an estrogen dominance. You are dominant compared to progesterone, so you end up with a ton of symptoms. So you can end up with estrogen dominance if you have too much estrogen and normal progesterone, too little progesterone and normal estrogen, or too little progesterone and too much estrogen. Think about it. So there's a lot of ways you can end up with estrogen dominance, and they're going to cause a ton of symptoms. But here's the thing. When you are estrogen dominant, it kills your energy. It also causes headaches and acne and fibroids and PCOS and PMS and mood swings and hot flashes and on and on and on. Now you take a woman who's exhausted and they got so many hormonal symptoms that they don't even know what's going on. They got thyroid, they got adrenal, they got estrogen dominance. And a lot of women will say, well, I don't even have my ovaries anymore. Well, you can still be estrogen dominant.
Yeah.
And that's a major cause of fatigue in women, is they are in what we call a metabolic storm. They got a problem with that Bermuda Triangle of hormones, and until they fix that, they're going to struggle with their energy. The check engine light's going on because they got a problem with their hormones. And specifically, those three hormones are giving them major, major issues. And it is probably the most common cause that we see, in just because of we deal a lot with hormones.
Yeah,
definitely the most common cause that we would see, right?
Absolutely.
Now, time-wise, we're running kind of at the end. Let's do this. Next episode, we'll talk about the last two causes. So today we talked about the Bermuda Triangle hormones, and then we will talk about how to, maybe we could talk about a little bit how to fix it. But if what we talked about today sounds like you, go to our website, martinclinic.com, sign up for a free video course. It's a full course, ton of information, but more importantly, we show you how in our clinic and over the years, how we deal with the Bermuda Triangle hormones. So go to our website, sign up. It's free. We get so much feedback on that program that people go through, and they love it. I mean, it answers their questions. They feel better. So I would encourage you to go do that. So again, we want to thank you for listening, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Doctor is In podcast from martinclinic.com. If you have any questions, you can reach us at info@martinclinic.com. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, you can head to our website and sign up for free. We also have a private Facebook group that you can join. It's a community of awesome people. Finally, I do a Facebook Live every Thursday morning at 8:30. Join us again next week for a new episode.